features that we use. That is going to take care of this for us. And we're also going to be taking a look at another tool called webpak, which is going to help us to run tasks and use JavaScript modules. And they're going to be a massive help to us when we're creating larger JavaScript-driven applications to structure our code into different files and modules. So all that and more is coming up in this chapter. So we want to be able to use bleeding edge JavaScript features inside our code, but we also want to make sure that all of our code still works in all browsers which don't support those modern features. Now to do this, we're using this tool called Babel, and I'm going to leave this link attached to this lecture. So Babel is an awesome tool which is going to convert all of our modern features which may not be supported by a browser into older supported code which can run in the browser. So if, for example, we use a class in our application, that is a modern feature and it isn't supported in Internet Explorer. Now, Babel will convert that class syntax into an older syntax using prototypes and stuff, which is supported in Internet Explorer. And all the time, it's going to maintain what the code actually does. So I think the best way to demo this is to give it a whirl yourself. So what we're going to do is go to the interactive demo by clicking try it out. And we're going to get two panes here. In the left is where we write our modern JavaScript code. This is the code we would typically write to create our application. And then using Babel, we're going to get a converted code over here, an older code, which is supported in all browsers. So then, let me start off just by creating a simple function. I'm not going to use any kind of modern JavaScript here. I'm just creating a normal function. And this is old code, which is supported in every browser. So all I'm going to do inside this function is console log hello, like so. So notice our code on the left, Babel does its magic and spits out code on the right, and these two are identical right here. So because this is not a modern feature, Babel doesn't actually need to do anything, and it doesn't change our code one bit. But what if now, instead of naming it greet here, we store this in a constants? And remember, constants are modern features. So we say const greet is equal to a function. Now, notice now we get var on the right side. That's because it's taken in this code, it's seen const, which is a modern feature not supported in all browsers, and it's converted that into an older version, var, which is how we used to declare variables. So let's do something else now. I'm going to take in a parameter into this function, and I'm going to output a template string. So over here, we'll do backticks instead and say hello name, like so. And notice over here, it does this concat method instead, because this is older supported JavaScript. This is not. This is a newer modern feature. Okay, one more. Let's turn this into an arrow function. So I'll get rid of the function keyword and do an arrow like so. And on the right, now we get the normal function keyword instead of the arrow function. So that is the essence of Babel. It's taking all of our modern code code, and it's spitting out this older code that is supported in browsers, but the functionality is still the same. This greet function is going to work exactly the same as this greet function. Okay, so let's do another example now. I'm going to this time create a class, which is a modern feature. We'll call this class user, and inside this class we'll just create a constructor, and that is going to take in a name. I cannot spell at the minute. A name parameter, and inside all we'll do is say this.name is equal to the name. So a very simple class. But notice on the right, we get all of this stuff instead. We get this constructor function right here that doesn't use a class, and we get all this code at the top as well. So this time Babel has converted this into something that looks a bit more complex, but nonetheless it's code that will do exactly the same thing as the code over here on the left when it runs in the browser. The only difference is that on the right, this is older code which is going to be supported in all browsers. Now, don't be put off by how complex this code is over here on the right. We as developers don't ever need to really understand or edit this code. We just need to update our own code, and Babel takes care of the conversion for us into this code. Now, to use Babel in our own project, we're going to need to install Babel onto our computer. And for that, we're going to also need to install something called Node.js and npm. Now, Node.js is a JavaScript environment that lets us run JavaScript code directly on our computer or on some kind of server, instead of just inside a browser and nowhere else. So far, when we've been writing JavaScript code, it's only been running in the browser and nowhere else. But now we need to install a JavaScript package directly onto our computer, Babel. And to do that, we need to install Node.js and npm. Now, npm is just a package manager that comes along with Node, which we're going to use to actually install the Babel package. Now, all of this probably sounds a lot more complex than it actually is. It's really simple to do and set up, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the very next video. So then, we want to install Babel on our computer to convert modern, potentially unsupported JavaScript into older, fully supported JavaScript. That's what we want to do. And to do that, to install Babel on our computer, we're going to need Node and npm installed on our computer first, so that we can run JavaScript code directly on our computer instead of just inside a browser. That is what Node allows us to do. Now, it may be that you already have Node installed on your computer without you even knowing. So to see whether you have it or not, we need to open up a terminal and test it. Now, to do that in VS Code, go to View and then go down to Terminal down here and click that. And then inside the terminal, just type in node-v. If you see a version number right here, it means you have Node installed. Now, I've got Node version 10.13. Now, you might have something else, but if you need to install Node, you're not going to see a version number. So at that point, you need to install Node.js. Now, to do that, you need to come to nodejs.org and then click on this button on the left over here. So if you click on that, it's going to download the package, and then when it's downloaded, just open that and go through the installation steps. I'll quickly go through those with you. So let me just open this file up. So just click on Next to begin the setup wizard and accept the terms, then click Next. Just keep it installed on your program files. You can change it if you want to, but I'd keep it installed there if I was you. Press Next, then press Next again, and then finally click Install to install Node.js. I'm not going to do that because I already have it installed on my computer, but if you click Install, that is going to install Node and npm onto your computer. So once you've done that and you have it installed on your computer, then come back to your terminal, and in fact you might need to close off VS Code, then reopen it, then go to your terminal again for this to work, then type node-v again, and you should see a version number. Like I said, you might have to restart VS Code to see that number, so make sure you do that. So now we have Node installed on our computer, we can just run JavaScript code directly on our computer and not inside a browser. Now, this is important because we need to be able to do this to install Babel, and Babel needs to be able to convert our code This is all done directly on our computer before it even gets to a browser. Babel doesn't convert code inside the browser, it does it on our computer first, and then we run that older code in the browser. So in order to run that code on a computer, that's why we needed Node, and that's how we're going to install Babel. Now, I also mentioned that we needed something called npm, the Node Package Manager, to actually install the Babel package. Now, this is automatically installed on our computer when we install Node.js. So we can use it to install Babel into this project folder. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just clear the terminal right here. Then I'm going to cd into chapter 19, because that is where we're going to do all of the work for this chapter. So chapter_19. And cd just means change directory. So currently I'm in the recording directory. I want to go into chapter 19. You might already be in this. So let me press enter, and then I'm going to clear again. So then the next thing we want to do is install Babel on our computer. Now before we install it, it's always a good idea when you have a new project which is going to be using npm and relying on third-party packages such as Babel to initialize what's known as a package.json file. Now, a package.json file keeps track of the different packages we install into our project, and it also describes other information about the project, such as the author, the GitHub repository for it, etc. So that if another developer comes to work on it, they have all that information to hand. So the way we create a package.json file is just by saying npm init. So this is an npm command. Now, when you press enter, this is going to ask us some questions. package name first of all, the version, we don't need to give it a description, the entry point, index, that's fine, test command, git repository, keywords, you can just enter through all these and then just press enter at the end. The version, we don't need to give it a description, the entry point, index, that's fine, test command, git repository, keywords, you can just enter through all these and then just press enter at the end because this is okay. And now if we open up chapter 19, we're going to see this package.json file, and it has this different information in this file, and it's also going to keep track of any packages that we later install. So this is a good habit to get into, saying npm init to create this package.json file whenever we're using some kind of packages inside your project directory. So always perform this step first and create this package.json file. So the next thing we need to do is now install Babel into this project directory too, so that we can use it to start transforming our code. And the way we use npm to install a package is by saying npm install and then whatever the package is called. Now we're going to say at babel /core, that's the core babel library. And also at babel /CLI, that's the Babel CLI. So these are two packages we're installing. Now we're also going to say double dash save dash dev, and that is going to save them to our developer dependencies. And we need to spell save correctly, like so. So double dash save dash dev. So when we do this, it's going to save them to our developer dependencies and list them as a dependency inside this package.json file. So if I click enter now, that's just going to take a minute or so. To install these packages and then add this thing, Babel CLI and Babel core, to our package.json file. So now if we take a look at package.json, we can see down here in dev dependencies these two packages which to our see down here in dev dependencies these two packages which we just installed. And when we install a package into a project, we can only use it inside this project directory. We can't then go and make another folder on our computer somewhere and use it in there, because we save these as dev dependencies for this project only. Okay, so you'll also notice that we have this node modules folder with a load of different stuff in it. All that stuff is package code. So when we install the package, it installed all the code that we need to run that package inside node modules. Now you're never actually going to need to really go into this folder or never edit anything in it. It's just there because that's where we install the package to. That's where the code belongs. And also you're going to notice it generates this package lock file over here. Never edit this either. This just locks down the different versions of the packages that we're using. So I'm going to cross that off now. So now we have Babel installed into this directory, we can go ahead and start to use it here to convert our code. But before we do that, we need to install one more thing, the Babel preset. So the Babel preset is just another package which we're going to install locally into this directory using npm. And it's basically just a set of plugins which are used to support certain language features. And we need them in order for our code to be converted correctly. So to install the preset, again, we're just going to use npm. Down here we say npm install, and then it's called @babel /preset env. We also want to save this to our dev dependencies, so do that and then press enter. So this is the preset which is going to allow us to use all of the latest JavaScript features, and it installs it into this directory locally and stores all the package files inside the node modules directory. Now I've just noticed an error, and that's because I've spelt Babel incorrectly, so let me just do this one more time. npm install, and it's @babel /preset env, and then we want to save these to the dev dependencies. So let me just double check this before I press enter. Okay, that looks all right. So that's just going to install the Babel preset for us now. So once we have that installed, we have to define the preset in a new file inside our project directory called .babelrc. So let me now come to chapter 19, press this icon for a new file, and call it .babelrc. So in here, is where we define what preset we want to use. So we do that by creating just an object like this, and inside we do a little quotation to say presets, and then a colon, and then we do array syntax, and again we do quotations, and we say what preset we want to use. Ours is the thing we just installed, so @babel /preset -env. So now when we run Babel to convert our code, it's going to know to use this preset because it knows about this file. It'll look in this file, see this preset, and use this preset to do it. So now we have everything set up to use Babel inside this project directory. Now this video might have seemed like a long and complicated process to get everything up and running, but once you do it a couple of times, it will become second nature to you. Now, as a quick recap, these are the steps that we performed. So first of all, we installed Node.js onto our computer globally. This is a one-time thing, and it means that we can run JavaScript on our computer. And when we did that, it also installed npm, the Node package manager as well, which we use to install other packages on our computer. Second, we used npm to create a new package.json file inside our project directory, and that keeps track of all of the different packages that we install into our project, as well as a couple of other things. Third, we used npm to install the Babel core package and the Babel CLI package locally. And by the way, the Babel CLI is just so we can use commands in the command line interface to run Babel. And then fourth, we installed the Babel preset locally and we registered that in the Babel RC file so that when Babel runs, it knows which preset to use to convert our code. So that is the whole process broken down into these 4 steps. And now we have a project environment which is set up and ready to use Babel to convert our modern JavaScript code into cross-browser compliant code that can work in pretty much every browser. So then, now we have everything ready and set up inside this project folder to start using Babel. First of all, we installed those 2 Babel packages, the CLI and the core, and also we installed this Babel preset, which will now handle how our code is converted. So now we can start to use the Babel CLI to actually do something. So what it's going to do is take one JavaScript file that we write with modern syntax, such as const and arrow functions or classes and all that jazz, and then it will convert it into another JavaScript file, which will be an older version of that code, and it will work in all browsers. So first of all, let us create a new file that we're going to create our modern JavaScript inside. So inside chapter 19, create a new file. We'll call this before.js because this is the code before it's being transformed. So inside here, I'm just going to say const greet, which is a modern feature, is equal to an arrow function, takes in a parameter, and this arrow function again is a modern feature, and inside here we're just going to console.log and we'll log out a template string hello and then the name. So this is 3 modern features. We have the const, the arrow function, and the template string right here. We're now just going to call that function greet like so. Okay, so this is ultimately the file that we want to convert into JavaScript that does work in all browsers, so an older version of this. So to do that, we're going to use the Babel CLI, and CLI just stands for command line interface, and it means we can run Babel down here in the terminal. So we're going to be using this Babel CLI to convert this code into a new file. Now the Babel CLI binary is inside the node modules folder, inside the bin directory right here. So if we want to use the Babel command down here in the terminal, first of all, we need to navigate to that directory in the terminal. So we're going to say node modules, and by the way, make sure you're in the chapter 9 directory at the minute, like me. So we'll say node underscore modules, and then /bin to go into this bin directory, and then /Babel, and that accesses the Babel binary. So now after this, we pass it 2 things. The file that we create, which is before.js, and that is the thing we want to convert, then the file we want to convert it to. So I'm going to say before.js, that's the thing we want to convert. Then we do -o to say where the output will be. So that's what this means, -o, and the output file is going to be a file called after.js. So if we run this now, Babel right here is going to take this file before, it's going to run through it and convert it into old code and spit it out into after.js. So let's run this now, press enter and see if this works. And notice over here now we have after.js. And you can see that now we have var instead of const, we have a normal function instead of an arrow function, and we have this concat method instead of a template literal. So that's done the work now. So when we come to upload our JavaScript to a web host, we'd upload this JavaScript because this is the stuff that is fully compatible with all browsers. So now whenever we want to convert our code, all we do is we update our actual code, our modern code, then we rerun this command right here. So we take in a before.js or whatever the file name is called that you want to convert, and then -o to specify the output, and then whatever you want to call the output file, wherever it's going to be going to. So there's one more thing I want to talk about before I finish this video, and that is this node modules folder right here. So remember, this node modules folder, this is where all of the third-party package code lives. So if we install a package, it lives inside this node modules folder. Now, if I was to ever send my project to another developer or upload it to GitHub, then I wouldn't send or upload this node modules folder. Every other file or folder I would send or upload, but not the node modules one because it's so huge. It contains a lot of code in it. And to send this to someone else or to upload this to GitHub would take a long time because it's so big. But then I just said that we need this node modules folder for our packages to run because that's where they're installed. So if I don't send or upload this folder with my project, how will another developer run this project correctly without that folder? Well, they can't. They need to get that folder back and reinstall all of those things. But that's simple thanks to our package.json file down here. Remember, the package.json file keeps track of all the packages that we install for this project. So when a developer gets this project without the node modules folder, they can still see inside the package.json file what packages need to be installed right here. Now, they don't have to install each one individually. They can do them all together by just using one command, and that is npm install. And this reinstalls all the packages inside package.json and creates a node modules folder for them again. So now everything would work. So I'm telling you this because if you were to download the course files for this chapter from my GitHub repository, then you won't see the node modules folder in those course files. You'll have to navigate to the project directory, chapter 19, in the terminal, and then you would have to run npm install to install all of these packages right there, and that will create the node modules folder for you. So let me just demo this. What I'm going to do is just close things off over here. I'm going to right click this and I'm going to go to delete. So that deletes the node modules folder, so it's no longer there. Now all you need to do is come into chapter 19, then say npm install, like that, press enter. That looks inside the package.json file. file, it finds all of these things right here and it installs them all for you. And now we see that node modules folder again. So now everything would work again. So then now we know how to convert our code using the Babel CLI. Let's now set up a typical workflow that we could use when we're creating some kind of real website using modern JavaScript. So first of all, let's just think for a minute about the end goal. Ultimately, what we want to do is create a website or web application, and we want to use modern features in our JavaScript code, but we want our code to be supported in all browsers, right? So what we need to do is create some kind of source folder in our application directory where we write all of our modern JavaScript code. Then we also want to create some kind of distribution folder, and that folder will contain an HTML file and our converted JavaScript code which runs in all browsers. Now the HTML file is going to contain a reference to that converted code, not our source file, and that whole folder, the distribution folder, is ultimately going to be the folder that we deploy or upload to our web server. So let's come up with some kind of project structure over here for this. So like I said, first of all, I want to create a folder called source or src, and that is going to contain all of our source JavaScript. So all of the modern featured JavaScript is going to live in here. And what I'll do is create a new file called index.js for now, and that's where we'll create our JavaScript. This is where we write our code. Now we'll create another folder inside chapter 19 and call this dist. And this folder right here is a distribution folder. It's going to contain all the end code. So inside this, first of all, I'm going to create another folder called assets, and this is where all of our stuff like JavaScript or images or CSS would ultimately live. Now for us, we just want to create a new file. I'm going to call this bundle.js, and that bundle.js is where we're going to output the converted code from this. So inside dist, I also want to create an index.html file, and this index.html file will have a reference to this bundle. So we'll do a script tag at the bottom down here. We'll say script. So HTML file will have a reference to this bundle. So we'll do a script tag at the bottom down here. We'll say script, and the source of that script is going to be inside the assets folder, and then /bundle.js. So this is the script that we're linking to, and this distribution folder, this is what we'd upload to a web server, and that is going to contain all of the converted code which we're linking to right here. Now, the thing is, we're never directly going to be writing code in here. We don't do that. Only write JavaScript code in our source folder JavaScript. So we'd write all of our code in here, then we'd have it converted into this file, so that this file contains JavaScript code that is browser compliant and is going to run in all browsers. Then we upload all of this stuff to the web server. Does that make sense? So let's do a little example now. What I'm going to do is come to index.js, and I'm just going to paste in this little bit of code right here. So this is using some modern features, right? Const, an arrow function, a template string, and we're just calling this function 3 times. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to save this index. In fact, I'm going to open this up in a browser because we don't already have it open. So let me open with live server over here. And now if I open the console, we're not going to see anything just yet because we don't have anything inside bundle.js, which is what the index is referencing. So now what we want to do is take this, we want to convert it into older supported code using Babel to this file, so that when we view index over here, we see that effect in the console. So remember, to do that, we use the Babel CLI. We need to make sure we're in the correct project directory. Then we say node_modules, because we need to go into the node modules folder first of all, then inside bin, so /bin/babel. So now we say the file that we want to convert, the input file, which is inside the source folder. So we say source and then /index.js, and then we say -o to say the output file, and that is going to be inside the dist folder /assets /bundle.js. Now press enter, and it's going to run, convert this code into older JavaScript and output it right here. So now we can see that older code. And because now we're referencing that file right here, when we load up index in the browser, now we see the effect of that. Cool. So this Babel script right here at the bottom, that is a lot to write every time we want to do this conversion, because we might make changes to this code several times and we have to write this out every time. So fortunately, we can define a script inside our package.json file, and that's going to help speed things up. So what I'm going to do right now is just copy this, which I have selected, and then I'm going to go over to package.json. And you'll notice we have this script section in package.json. So this scripts thing right here allows us to quickly run scripts by referencing whatever the script is called down here in the terminal. So this is a test one. We don't need that. So what I'm going to do is delete that, and I'm going to create one called babel, like so. And then we do colon, and then whatever this script is, and it has to be in a string. So let's paste this in because we just copied it from down here. So it's node modules bin babel, and then taking the index file, which we want to convert, and specifying the output file right here. So now we have this shortcut script. And now if we want to run this script, we can just type down here. We have to save this first. We can type down here, npm, then we say run to run a script, and then whatever the script is called. So babel in this case. Now I'm not going to run it just yet because we've not actually changed our index file over here. So let me just in fact delete link and then run this again. So hopefully now inside bundle, when we run this, link will be gone. So let me save this file first of all, then say npm run babel, press enter, and let's check. Over here now, we can see inside bundle.js that that link statement has gone. And over here, we don't see link anymore. Awesome. So that's a much quicker way now. We can just say npm run babel every time we want to do this conversion. Again, though, this might become tedious having to run the script over and over again. It would be nice if we could just run the script once, which initially converts the JavaScript, and then subsequently it watches our source file right here. Then whenever we make a change and save that file, it converts it again automatically without us having to rerun the script. And we can do this using a special flag where we define this script, and that flag is called the watch flag. So we can do this just after the input file right here where we specify what we're watching, and we say space -w, and that watches this file for any changes. And when we make a change and save the file, it runs this whole script script again automatically, so we don't have to do that. So if I save this now, what I'm going to do is run the script once to start, and then whenever now I make a change to index.js, over here, which is what we're watching, then it's going to run that script again. So I'm just going to call this again and pass in link, save it, and then check out over here, bundle.js, and we can see link is back. Again, I might just come back over here and let me cross off this. Let me create a class user, and I'm just going to say inside constructor, and inside this constructor, we'll just say this.score is equal to 0. So a very basic class. I'm going to save that again. Then if we go to bundle, we can see all of the updated code. So now we don't have to completely rerun the script every time we're making changes. We just do it once to begin with. It watches the file, and then every time we save that file, it automatically updates this bundle, and then obviously updates over here in the browser. So now we have a nice environment set up to automatically convert our code, and now we know a bit about Babel and what it does. I'd like to move on to another tool called webpak. Okay then, so we've seen the first tool that I wanted to show you in this chapter, and that was Babel, which helps us to convert modern JavaScript into older syntax that's more widely supported in browsers. Now, the next tool that I want to show you is an extremely popular front-end tool called webpak. Now, webpak is primarily known as a module bundler, which means it can take multiple source files and then bundle them together in a single output file. And this is going to be really useful when we start to work with ES6 modules inside our code. But it can also do other things as well, like run Babel through it, so that when we bundle our modules, Babel can convert any modern syntax into older, more widely supported syntax. And we can also use it to spin up a local development server and do other things as well. So we're going to be looking at all of this in the rest of this chapter, but by far the best thing it allows us to do is to split our code up into modules. And this is going to allow us to create a much more structured code base in our projects. So I want you to imagine this scenario now. We have currently this distribution folder, and inside we have the bundle.js. That is our output file, the final JavaScript that's hooked up to this index.html file. Now, inside our source folder, we have this index.js file, but we might also have two additional files. We might have a JavaScript file communicating with a database for accessing data, and also we might have another JavaScript file for interacting with the DOM and the web browser. So, at any point, this index file right here might want to import some functionality from the other two files. Now, webpak will allow us to do that. We can define some export values from our other two JavaScript files. For example, we could export a function to get data from a database from the database file, or we could export a function which shows some kind of pop-up from the DOM manipulation file, and so forth. We could have many different exports from these files which do different things. Then we could import them into index.js. And these things that we export are just chunks of code, otherwise called modules. Now, we don't need to import everything that we export from a file. We might not need them all the time, but we can import what we need, and webpak will allow this exporting and importing of modules, and then it's going to take all the resulting code and bundle it together in a single file. Now, along the way, we can also integrate our webpak workflow with Babel too, so that the resulting bundle that we see here is compiled to widely supported JavaScript syntax. So it's all going to work together really nicely. So let's dive in now in the next video and set up webpak. Okay then, so to get started with Webpack, the first thing that we should do is create a Webpack config file in the root of our project directory, so inside chapter 19 right here. Now this file is where we specify how we want Webpack to work. It's essentially going to be our Webpack control center, and it's going to outline things like where our source files are located and where they should be bundled to. Now before, when we worked with Babel, we placed these options directly in the script over here. We specified where the source file was and where we want to output it to. But because Webpack can do so much more than Babel, we have a whole dedicated file for all of our options. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Now we're going to create a Webpack config file. Now to do that, let's just create a new folder inside chapter 19 called webpak.config.js. So inside here, this is where we're going to specify all of our Webpack setup. Now the first thing that we need to do is say module.export is equal to an object. And this object is basically an options object for how we want Webpack to work. Now the module.exports bit right there, that is something completely new to us at this point. Now this is not JavaScript that can run normally in a browser. It's JavaScript that can only run directly on a computer with the help of Node.js. So this is another reason we need Node.js installed to run code like this inside our Webpack config file on a computer. Because remember, this Webpack file, this is not going to be running in the browser. It's going to be running in the computer to compile all our code together, bundle it all together, and then spit out this bundle. And this bundle is ultimately the only thing that is going to be running inside a browser. So all this code that we write here, this is going to be run on our computer. Using Node.js. And this module.exports thing right here is something only available when we're running JavaScript on a computer using Node, not in a browser. So module.exports basically means that we're going to export a Webpack configuration object right here, which Node.js is then going to process when we run the Webpack command later on. Now inside this object, we need to specify two main properties. We need to set an entry property and then an output property. The entry property is a path to a file which our initial input file, probably this thing right here, is living. And the output is going to describe where we want the resulting JavaScript bundle file to be output. So let's do this. First of all, let's do the entry. So let's create a property called entry. Oops, spell it correctly for a start. And this is going to be set equal to a simple string. This string is going to be a relative path to this entry point file. So currently we're in the root folder, so we could say // to say current directory, and then we want to go into the source folder, then we want to go into the index.js. So that is our entry point right there, this file. So that's the first property done. So the next property we need to do is the output property. So let's do that. And this is not just going to be a single string value. This is going to be an object because we need to specify a couple of things and we need to put our comma just after that. So inside here, first of all, we need to specify the path. Now, the path this time is not going to be a relative URL. It's going to be an absolute URL. And an absolute URL basically describes where the file is located on this computer relative to the root of my computer. Now, that would mean if I open up my terminal, I would have to, let me just right clear in here, I would have to copy all of this because this is from the root of my computer and then go from here up until this file over here, bundle.js. Now, that's fine, I could do that, but what if then I uploaded this to GitHub, then you downloaded it, you would have to go in and change this path completely. So instead of doing that, I'm going to approach this a different way. What I'm going to do is use another node-only feature, and that is the dir name property. So if I do something like this, __ dir name, that right there gets us the complete absolute path up until this directory, the root directory of the project where the webpak file is sitting. So that gets us this far to chapter 19, but what we have to do then is tack on the rest of the path to the output right here, bundle.js. Now I can't just tack on a string like that. Instead, what we have to do is use a node method, a built-in node method called path.resolve. So what I'm going to do first of all is come up here and I'm going to require something. So I'm going to say const path is equal to require, and we're requiring right here the path module in Node.js. So this is a built-in module in the Node.js core library. This comes when you install Node.js on your computer. So all I'm doing here is requiring that particular module from the Node library. And it means now we can use it over here. So I'm going to use this function path.resolve. And this method right here takes two parameters, the two parts of the path that we want to join together. So we want to take __ dir name, and that gets us the absolute URL of this folder relative to the root of our computer. So it's going to look something like this right here. Now we want to also join it to the second part, which is going to be inside the dist folder, then inside assets, then bundle.js. So let's tack on the second part. We do a comma, then a string. We want to go inside dist and then / assets. Now we don't say the file name at the end. Okay, we just do the path to the folder where the file will be, because the next property down here inside this object is going to be the file name, and that's what we say. The file as. So this is where we save it, the output, and this is the file name that we save it as. So we'll just call this again bundle.js. So now inside our webpak config file, we're saying that our entry point is right here, which is down here, and our output point and output file name is right here. So when we run webpak in the future, it's going to know where to start and where to finish. Now it's not doing much in between at the minute, but it's a start. And in the next video, we'll look at how we can actually run webpak using the webpak CLI. Okay, so now we have our basic webpak configuration made. We need to actually run webpak to do its stuff. Now, before we do that, I just want to say, if you don't fully understand this code at the minute, don't worry too much about that. As we go forward and we work with webpak a little bit more, and even towards the end of this video, hopefully you'll start to understand it a little bit more. Just know that for now, we're creating this object which represents options and configuration for how webpak is going to run. So all we're really doing at the minute is saying where our source JavaScript lives, the initial file, and where we're ultimately going to output it. So when we run webpak in the future, it knows where to get our source code and where to output it. And like I said, we're not doing anything in between those two steps really at the minute. But again, this is all going to become more clear as we go on. But anyway, we want to run webpak now. And to do this, we need to install two things. We need to install the webpak core package and also the webpak CLI. Much like we installed Babel core and the Babel CLI, we need to install webpak core and webpak CLI. So let's come down here and do this. I'm going to go into chapter 19, so cd and then chapter_19. Then I'm going to say npm install, and those two packages are webpak and webpak-CLI. Now we want to save these to our dev dependencies so that they're inside the package.json file. So we'll say save dev like so. Oops, there we go. Okay, hit enter, and that's going to install those for us. So then once that's installed, we can now run webpak to do this kind of thing. Now again, the webpak binary is stored inside node modules inside the bin. And if we scroll down, we can see webpak right here. So we need to do a similar thing to when we used Babel for the first time. We need to first go into node_modules and make sure you're in the correct directory. Then we go / into the bin folder, then / webpak. And now we can just hit enter. We don't need to add any other options like the input or the output file here like we did with Babel before, because all of that stuff, all of the configuration is inside webpak config. So when we run webpak, it's going to know to look inside this file and do all of this stuff. It's going to find the entry file and output it to the output right here. So if we're looking at our entry file at the minute, we can see all of this stuff. Let's just delete the class for now. We don't really need that. And I'm going to save this. And I'm also going to make sure we've saved our webpak file as well. And then what I'm going to do is run webpak. So if I run this now, then we're going to notice that this has now completed. And if we go over to bundle, you're going to notice something a bit different. Now, this code might look like gobbledygook, but all it is minimized code. So it's taken the code from here and it's squashed it all together into a compressed version so that the file size is ultimately going to be smaller, especially when we start to work with larger files over here. And it's output that to bundle.js. At the moment though, webpak is not converting our modern syntax over here, things like const and the arrow function and the template string, it's not converting that into older syntax that is more widely supported in browsers. So currently we're losing out on that feature of Babel. But later on, we're going to be integrating Babel with our webpak config over here so that when we run webpak, it's going to take our source file over here and it's going to run that through Babel as well, convert all those new modern features into older syntax, then minimize everything and spit it out into bundle.js. So that will be cool. So anyway, every time we want to use webpak, we're going to be using a command like this. However, again, it would be a pain if we had to remember this command and type it out every time. So what we're going to do is copy this, so Control-C, and I'm going to go into the package.json file over here and create another script. So after Babel, I'm going to do another one called webpak, and next to that, I'm going to do this that I just copied, which is node modules /bin/webpak. So now every time we just type down here npm run webpak, it's going to do the same thing, only the first option, npm run webpak, is easier to remember. So let me just save this, and let me just add something on here, just to make sure it's all going to work. I'm going to save that now. Then down here, I'm going to say npm run webpak, because that was our script name, and hit enter, and this is going to do the same thing for us and spit it out into bundle.js. Now, it's hard for us to see that it's done that at the minute because, like I said, it's compressed everything, minimized everything into this small squashed code, but we can see over here we have these two logs, link and link. So now we have webpak up and running. In the next video, we'll see how we can use it to start playing around with modules. Now, so far, it might seem like we've not actually accomplished much at all with webpak. Yeah, we've installed it and we've created a webpak config file, but at the minute when we run webpak, all it's doing is taking our source code and it's spitting it out into bundle.js and it's minimizing it. So webpak can do so much more than this, and one of the better things it can do is allow us to use ES6 modules. Now, a module is basically a chunk of code that we can export from one JavaScript file and then import it into another JavaScript file. Now, we can't currently do this without a module bundler like webpak, so let's have a look at this in action. So we already have a single index.js file over here. I'm going to delete this stuff that we have, and we want to now create another file called dom.js, and the idea is that this file right here is going to be responsible for interacting with the DOM. So what I'm going to do first is say console.log and then DOM file. So we know when this runs, it's coming from this DOM file. Okay, now after that, I'm going to do a few things in this file. First of all, I'm going to say const body is equal to documents.query selector, and we want the body tag, and all that's going to do is grab this file over here, so the body tag right there. So we have that stored in a reference now, and then I'm going to create a function called style body, set this equal to an arrow function, and over here inside, all we're going to do is take the body reference, which we have, then we're going to access the style property, and we're going to set the background style of that body to peach buff, which is like a peachy color. Okay, so that's that function defined. I'm also going to create another function, so const, we'll call this one add title, set it equal to an arrow function. This time we'll take in some text as a parameter, and inside this function, all we're going to do is say const title is equal to documents.create element. So we've seen this method before to create an element. We're going to create an h1 tag. Then we're going to say title.text content, so we can set the text content of that title we just created, and we'll set it equal to text, which is what we take in as a parameter. Finally, we want to say body, which is the reference to the body tag. Then we want to append a child, so we say append child, and we append the title we just created, which has this text inside it. So we've seen all of this kind of stuff before, basic DOM manipulation, and we have two different functions inside this file now. Now what I'm going to do is just call these functions. Down here, I'm going to say style body, and then below that, I'm going to say add title. We need to pass in an argument here, which is going to be the text. We'll just say hello world from the DOM file. Okay, so now if I save this, what I'm going to do is come to index.js and I want to import this DOM file into the index. So the way I can do that is simply by saying at the top import and then the file that I want to import in a string. So it's in the current directory, so // then the name of the file dom.js. But when we use this import system, we don't need to specify that this is a JavaScript file. Webpak is clever enough to figure that out. So I'm going to just do that. And then what I'm going to do is come down here below and I'm going to say console.log and I'm going to log index file. So over here we have a console log saying DOM file, so we know where that is, and then we have index file. So now if I save this, what we need to do first of all is run webpak. So I can say npm run webpak to do that. And once this is done, it's going to spit out all the code inside this file. Now, what do you think is going to happen? Well, let's now go to a browser. So let me go over here and let me try and refresh over here. I think we'll have to restart the server. So let me go to index.js, right click and go to open with live server. So we should see that over here. And Now we can see the title, which is output from this file over here when we call add title, and we can also see the background is that peach color that we set over here when we call this function. So this is all working, and if I right click and inspect, we can see in the console DOM file, then index file. These were the console logs. So what's happening? Well, when we say import a file, it's going and getting that file and it's going to run it first. So that's why we see DOM file first over here. Then when it's run this file, it's going to go back to where we imported it and carry on with the rest of this file. And that's all this does at the minute. Now then, what if inside this file I wanted to use one of these functions, like add title or style body? Well, at the minute, that is not going to work, and I'll demonstrate that. If I try to now down here say add title and then pass something in, just say like test or something, then if I save this and run over here, we don't see that. But first of all, my mistake, we have to say npm run webpak to update this. Then if we go over here and refresh, we can see add title is not defined. So we're trying to do this, but it's saying add title is not defined. So when we use modules to import a file like this, it runs the code inside that file, but it doesn't automatically share any variables or functions with the file that imports it. So I couldn't automatically access any of the variables or functions that I define inside this DOM file. And that's because when we're using modules, each file has its own unique scope. So in order for this to work, we have to manually export functions that we want to use inside index from this file. So how do we do that? Well, we can do that by putting an export keyword in front of the things we want to export. So I could do that with the these two things. Now, if I save it, if I come over here, we have to explicitly import those things from this file as well. So the way we do that is by saying curly braces, and then in here, the names of the things that we want to import. Now, they must match the names of the things we export over here. So I'm going to copy that and paste that first of all. Then we also want add title, which is the name of the other thing that we export over here. So now we're importing these two things and we say from the DOM. So when we're importing particular functions or variables, from a file that we export, we say import, then curly braces, the things we want to import from whatever the file is. That's the way we do it. So now if I run this, I'm going to save it and run webpak again, npm run webpak. Then I'm going to come over here and we can see now we get the second one, test, when we call it from here. And we can do that now because we've explicitly imported that function from this file. So that's nice. Now what I'm also going to do is delete where we call these functions down here and just call them from index.js. So now I'm going to do this test and I'll also say style body like this. We don't pass in any arguments here. Save it and we need to run webpak again, npm run webpak. Then we come over here and it still works. So we're still outputting this test and still coloring the background peach, but this time we're calling those functions from here and not inside dom.js. Now we can export more than just functions from a file. We can export any kind of data like arrays, objects, strings, classes, etc. So let's now try exporting a string. So I'm going to come down here and say export, and then I'm going to create a const called contact, which is going to be a string. We'll set that equal to Mario at the net ninja. .co.uk. So now we're exporting this string. If I save that, come back to index, I'm going to also import this. So the variable name is contact, and then I'm going to console.log contact down here. Oops, these need to be in parentheses, contact. And save this. Then we need to run npm webpak. And then once that's done, we can come over here. We can see this is logged to the console. So now we're importing a string as well as these other things. Okay, so just one more thing. At the minute when we're exporting things, we're exporting everything as we define them. Now sometimes it's easier just to define your functions and variables and other things as normal, like this, and then just export everything in one big go at the bottom. Now the way we do that is by saying export at the bottom, then we're doing an object, and we're just going to list the things that we want to export. So style body, add title, and also contact. So this is now exporting all of these things in exactly the same way as before, same behavior as if we put export in front of each one of these things. It's exporting each one at the bottom now. So now I'm just going to import them exactly the same way over here. We don't need to change that, and this is still going to work. So let me say npm run webpak, and then come over here. Let's do a refresh, and we can see everything still works the same. So this is just an alternative way of exporting things. You can use whichever way that you wish, but now we know the basics of using modules. Let's take it one step further and look at default exports in the next video.